Okay, well, welcome everybody. My name is Adam Krieger with Preferred Strategies. I want to thank you guys for your time today and attending our webinar, The Clif Bar Journey with Data. I have with me on the line Todd Wilson, Senior Vice President of IT at Clif Bar & Company. We're going to go over a few slides real quick and then pass it over to Todd, as I think that's why you're here. As far as logistics go, if the GoToMeeting panel is taking up part of your screen, you should be able to minimize that with a little orange arrow. There's also inside that panel a questions, a Q&A or questions panel there. You go ahead and type your questions in there. We'll actually come back to those at the end of the session. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. The agenda today, again, just for those of you who are new to Preferred Strategies, brief overview of who we are, what we're all about, and then we'll get into the fun of today with the Clif Bar webinar and presentation. So that's the agenda for us. As far as Preferred Strategies, we've been around since 2002. I'm the founder of the company, but we really focus on bridging the gap between market-leading business intelligence and the JD Edwards ERP. And we started in the years back when I actually worked for a customer of JD Edwards, struggling getting information out of the system. We found Crystal Reports. As a company, we helped other JD Edwards customers learn how to write Crystal Reports. Then that turned into full-blown business objects. We still do a lot of that today. However, in the last few years, with Microsoft and Power BI kind of taking over as the de facto standard, that's where that leading technology has been very appealing to a lot of customers. And so we've created a package called our Quick Launch. And Todd will be speaking of how they use that at Clif Bar throughout the session today. But that's in essence what we do. We provide that accelerator to help you get up and running with market leading BI, in this case Power BI with JD Edwards. We also provide services in the form of consulting and training, or even direction and strategy type services as well. We look at all of our relationships with our customers as a partnership, and look forward to hopefully you enjoy this session. And I'll go ahead and be turning this over to Todd. But before I do, I just want to say how much of a thrill and honor it is for any company to be able to work with a company like Clif Bar. But when it comes to reporting and business intelligence and analytics, Clif Bar is hands down leading edge in all these areas, and so it's really a pleasure to be and partner with them and be part of that success that you're going to hear from Todd today. So Todd's got a long history in this space, and as a head of technology there at Clif Bar, I hope you enjoy his session as much as I do. So I'm going to go ahead and pass this over, and then we will come back at the end. So feel free to, again, post your questions as we go along, and then we'll come back and answer those at the end. So I'm going to go ahead and make Todd presenter. Give us a second here while we switch. Okay. And then what we'll do is once we get back to the live demonstration, I'll flip it back to yours.
Okay. That sounds good. Okay. Well, as I was saying, the relationship with Preferred Strategies is one of the reasons I was excited to be able to share with you our journey today, but also to be able to give a little bit of insight into what it's like at Clif Bar. Because although we'll talk some about technology and how technology really is the driver with much of what we're doing and the success we're having around analytics, our approach to people, the way we think about how we work as a company, our values-based approach to doing business is just as important, and in fact creates many more challenges, but also opportunities to that success. So it's first and foremost about our journey, which is continuing, and second about the fact that we really are trying to be a different kind of company. So just in terms of a little bit of history about Clif Bar as a company, we were founded 26 years ago. In Berkeley, California. We're now just down the street in Emeryville. That's our base, our headquarters. And we make health and nutrition snacks. You see some of the brands there on the screen itself. The flagship brand, the Clif brand, is something that's probably most widely known, but also some of our other products, whether that's the gels, the Clif Protein, Z-Bar is our kids line of product. Luna is a brand that we launched several years ago that is specific to nutrition needs of women. Those are all brands within the Clif Bar umbrella, and a few others, but those are the big ones. So no doubt you've had the chance to at least see, if not taste, some of those snacks. And if that's not the case, please let me know, and I'll follow up afterward to make sure you get a chance to sample some of our products. The company has grown pretty significantly over the last several years. It's been a double-digit compounded annual growth rate for about a decade. That has created a very vibrant category, but also in recent years has increased the competition quite a bit. Because of the growth of that category, we've continued to see that growth ourselves, but also seen a number of other competitors in that space, which is why it's just as important as ever as to really understand and get as good as we can in our analysis of all the data that we're collecting. It is, as I mentioned, a values-based company, not just privately held, and we'll talk about the values-based approach in a minute. But one of the most significant things about this journey for us is that for the first 24 years, we didn't make any of our own product. And that is significant because we've had quite the digital transformation in the last couple of years. Back in 2014, as we were looking to continue to increase our capacity, we simply couldn't find enough co-packing space out there to outsource. And so we decided to build our first greenfield facility. We made the decision to build that facility in Twin Falls, Idaho, for a number of reasons that aligns best with our values-based approach. And that was a slow ramp up where we could really figure out self-manufacturing at a reasonable pace, with a reasonable paced implementation and a ramp up over time that really made sense. At the same time, one of our largest co-packers decided to get out of that business. And shortly after going live with that greenfield facility, we actually ended up in a position where we were taking over an existing co-packer's facility, and our largest at that. And so within the span of about 6 months, we went from making none of our own product to making close to 70% of our own product. And when you're making over 1 billion bars a year, that's a lot of product. That's a lot of disruption in our business. So our digital journey, our analytics journey, first and foremost centers probably most prominently around our move into self-manufacturing, which we'll talk about shortly. So the values-based approach to business is really about two different things. First is aspirations. And we have our 5 aspirations that are really the way we make decisions and the way we strive to do business as a company. So you see here the aspirations in the form of a spoken wheel. Really, they're all mutually dependent. The typical company that's for-profit is going to focus on that business aspiration. And for us, that's just one of 5. In fact, we often reference the fact that we have 5 bottom lines. So our CFO will give quarterly updates on the success of the company, and it will include things like EBIT and profitability and revenue growth, but it will also include all of the other 4 aspirations you see there. Brand for us, sustaining our brands, is about the integrity of our product, and our co-packers will certainly attest to the fact that we're probably a little bit overboard when it comes to the types of demands we have around the quality of our product. But that's because that's so important to us that the quality of our product is exceptional. The value and strength and integrity of our brands are to the highest standards possible. Our people aspiration, which we'll talk quite a bit as we talk through the journey that we've had in the analytics space at Clif Bar, our people aspiration is first and foremost about sustaining our people, and in some ways that is shown in the way we provide benefits for our employees, everything from traditional benefits to ESOP. So every employee that comes to work for Clif Bar becomes an employee owner. We have 30 minutes a day to go exercise, and that's part of our company time. We can set aside time during the day for community service. As people come in to join the Clif Bar culture, it often is because of their passion for the community, and that's also one of our other aspirations. But the people aspect does make it unique at Cliff Bar. We're not a high-tech company, and so you're just as likely to see a meeting deferred or maybe postponed for a bike ride that maybe was planned at the last minute, or community service as a more typical reason. And so that's just part of the culture here. It also means that people aren't naturally gravitating toward the latest and greatest in technology. That's not to say we don't have people like that at Cliff Bar, but it really is about outdoor adventure, and that is really the core of the way the company was founded, with Gary inventing the bar after an epiphany on a bike ride one day, and that still is very much true today. Our community aspiration is really about sustaining our community, the community around us, and that is most prominent in the way that we give back to the community through service hours. It is different for every employee. Everybody's got their own passion, but also collectively we often come together for company-wide service days where we will shut down the bakery in Twin Falls, or shut down the bakery in Indianapolis, or shut down our headquarters here, and all collectively go out to a food bank or to a park cleanup or some type of community service. Also very important when we talk about analytics is the metrics that we use to support whether or not we're successful in these areas. So we'll see when we get to the demo how we monitor community service and take that data to figure out what kind of KPIs are really driving our success, and how do we monitor those. And finally, the planet aspiration. So the planet aspiration for us is really about sustaining our planet. It's everything from waste diversion, which we strive for 100% waste diversion where possible in our bakeries, in our headquarters, and even personally through things like eco posses that are trying to constantly re-educate everyone on things like recycling and waste diversion. And it's also about carbon footprint. It's about other ways to help sustain the planet that are within our control, even though it's not a Cliff Bar footprint. So we work with our suppliers to try to figure out how they can, with no incremental cost, figure out ways to approach things in a more sustainable way. So the aspirations really are what drives the decisions that we make as a company, and therefore one of the most important things that we try to monitor when it comes to analytics, so that we can see our progress and whether or not we're attaining those specific goals, and not just in a traditional way around our business, but in every one of these areas. And if the aspirations is what we do, then the ingredients is how we do it. And I won't go into all these in as much detail, but they really are what we look for when we're bringing on new team members. It's what we look for in each other and hold each other accountable to. Really, each of these is a long discussion in of itself, but it really does drive what we have experienced in our journey. Probably the most important, as we've gone into self-manufacturing, is this concept of own it. We really do have an expectation of each other within Cliff Bar to own it. We take responsibility for what we're doing. We take responsibility for how we do it, and that really drives really the way we approach everything at Cliff Bar. So the aspirations and that look is really the values foundation. The ingredients is how we approach that. So the journey we've had with respect to analytics, to me, is very similar to a journey I recently had. And in the spring of this year, in April, 4 buddies and myself, we decided to do something we had never done before. We went to Spain and did a 6-day cycling trip that was just over 300 miles and about 25,000 vertical feet. To say that we didn't really know what we were getting into is a bit of an understatement. And that is very much like our journey into analytics at Cliff Bar. Most notably, our journey into analytics around self-manufacturing. We really didn't know what we were getting into. This trip that we took and all signed up for, I think, thinking that eventually it would never quite come to be, somebody for sure would find a reason why we weren't going to do it. Suddenly we found ourselves at the foot of these mountains that you see in the background there, and we didn't have any choice. We were headed into this journey that we really didn't understand. In fact, the name of the trip was called the Cheeky Calls of Costa Blanca, which we really didn't understand in any way. And it turns out that was a British term, and it meant the arduous mountain passes of the White Coast. And so we were tackling the arduous passes of Spain and really not knowing just how far we were going to make it in this journey. The mountain passes were increasingly difficult. This particular mountain pass is called the Col de Ratas. The Col de Ratas is famous on the Tour de Spain. It's famous with training, cycling teams training. We saw many while we were there. It's probably hard to see in your computer screen, but there are actually two cyclists on that road in the left edge of the photo to give you a perspective of what that was like. The Col de Ratas actually has a stoppomat. So at the bottom of the mountain, you will take a card and punch the time on it. And then when you get all the way to the top of the mountain, you punch it again, and then you can drop that into a box where your time is then recorded and posted onto a website. So the Col de Ratas has a stoppomat that records that with a website to prove that you've been there and shows your name. And I'm happy to say that none of the five of us were at the very bottom of that list, though we didn't miss it by much. And in the end, that journey ended up being something that we look back on and say that was one of the hardest things we've ever done. But standing on the top of the Col de Ratas, you see here, was a success that we really didn't think was achievable. And that is sort of a personal metaphor for me as we've tried to convey what was it like going through this journey at Clif Bar, and what is it like going forward. Because the journey itself, you see here the Clif Bar timeline, began right at the beginning of Clif Bar. And a couple of things to note in recent years. You can see the sales line with a trend that's continuing up. Yeah, so the sales growth that we've seen, especially in recent years, has been pretty disruptive. And then, of course, self-manufacturing. You see the second chart there, which really began at the beginning of 2016, meant that this constantly increasing data really put us at a point where we had big data far beyond what we were prepared for. You also see the corresponding timeline with respect to our E1 footprint. And that's significant because that gave us more capability as we moved forward, both from a manufacturing standpoint, but also in the ability to really make better use of that data. We had some data warehousing up to that point that we brought in Preferred Strategies, but that was a real pivotal time for us because we were then able to start using the data models that Preferred Strategies had worked hard to define and make available to address some of these challenges that were emerging. So we mentioned already the challenge of a move to self-manufacturing. That in and of itself was a major transformation of the company. 3 times the number of employees, the volume was staggering. We had 3 different languages because the bakery of our co-packer in Indianapolis actually had 3 different languages that were spoken. And so that created a number of challenges, but probably just as challenging was the 24/7 support. So up until that point, about 2.5 years ago now, we weren't supporting more than just 5 days a week. And even then, because it's such an outdoor culture, you often have people leaving early and going on cycling rides on a Friday. And so the level of support was far different than what exists now. That 24/7 support meant we had to have access to information and have the information readily available for us to be able to adequately support multiple time zones in a 24/7 operation. But then the overarching challenge of all of that was to do so in a culture that is values-based. So how do we do this? How do we move to self-manufacturing? How do we move to the technology that we wanted to introduce in terms of analytics, in terms of our leveraging of data, and do it with the type of culture that we wanted to maintain, which is sustaining our people, sustaining our community, our planet, and obviously the quality of our brand all at the same time. So that resulted in a number of different tools as we moved through that experience, starting with Quick Launch and then really expanding that out. So Quick Launch really became the foundation of how we built access to information to really leverage. We've extended beyond that now, so we are leveraging some of the MES data, for example, in the bakeries and some of the POS data, and we'll talk just a little bit about that in a subsequent slide. So just in terms of the scope of what we were trying to integrate and all of the data that now was flowing in, this is a list of all of the different process areas that were brand new to us. So each of these areas, whether you start with the receiving line or work all the way down to the people aspect, the facility itself, and everything in between, all of the operations, all of the quality, this was all new to us. And I won't go through this line by line, but hopefully that gives you just a little bit of a glimpse of the overall scope that we were faced with. On top of that, it really became an IT initiative to try to integrate all these processes and therefore subsequent systems. With the Greenfield facility in Twin Falls, Idaho, we didn't have any resources there. We didn't have any employees there. And so we were beginning to define business requirements as we were moving into self-manufacturing without anybody to point to try to help define what they really want and what they will need as we begin to produce bars in this new facility. So that meant we were having to leverage some past experience in some of the team members, have to leverage some consulting and best practices used to be able to define these scopes while trying to understand what data is relevant from each of these different areas and how will we integrate that into our full analytics journey, and how does that change over time as we begin to refine these processes. The second bakery was a little different. In that case, we had plenty of people to choose from, but we were already established on that path and had to really stick to that same scope and the same types of processes and systems. And so there it was an effort to really retrain and refocus in this new environment and these new systems, because we had people that for 15 years had been operating in the same way in one particular role on the manufacturing floor, and now we were asking them to change it. And even the slightest change, if you've been doing something for that long, was no small feat. And then in terms of the architecture itself, but you see here the high-level bakery architecture, and the blue boxes here represent the different systems that we needed to integrate in order to support this end-to-end set of processes. So this was all new and incremental to what we had previously at Clif Bar. So our previous E1 footprint didn't include manufacturing, so we expanded that. We put in place manufacturing on the shop floor. We expanded that. We added key systems like RFGen, Wonderware for our MES environment, and a few ancillary bolt-on systems, and integrated that end-to-end. So the integration you see here was really key to the success of supporting all these processes. Not the least important was to support all the highly automated equipment that existed in our Greenfield facility, while also supporting the existing equipment and processes in the second bakery at the same time. And as we began to scope this out, one of the things that became critical was the way we fed this information, both from E1 and from our MES environment, into a single source of information. So the enterprise data warehouse became our essentially one-stop shop. So source of record information as well as ancillary information all being collected into that enterprise data warehouse really set the foundation to begin to build the analytics capability, the reporting, visualization that we ultimately wanted to see on top of that once we were at a steady state in our production process. So this is a high-level architecture of what the bakeries each look like, and that all really, from a data perspective, ultimately feeds into that enterprise data warehouse. One other key bit of information that I happened to collect as we were in the middle of this process was from Gartner. And Gartner's research at the time, and I don't think it's changed much since, was that 72% of major systems implementations fail. Now, it's not a stat that I was making very well known as we're going through this very stressful type of implementation. But the reality was we were actually trying to do two at the same time. So we had a Greenfield facility, which had a likelihood of success of 28%, and then a co-packer conversion, much different challenge, but also 28%. And at the end of the day, if you're more math-oriented, it sort of felt exactly like what you see there, that our likelihood of success was probably single digits. And you didn't have to say that to anyone. We really felt it. And had it not been for the values-based approach and the ingredients that really are a part of the culture, I don't think we ever would have found that success. But in fact, everyone to a person really embraced that in ways we never thought possible because manufacturing was such a distant thought for most. And so at the end of the day, I am happy to say that we did succeed. We did go live. And the way we did that was to take what we had done at that greenfield facility and replicate that as much as possible. So we essentially mirrored the implementation. We took almost point for point in any of the specs. There were a few nuances in terms of the process equipment that had to be different. But even the data collection, even the standardization of things like OEE, the standardization of things like how we calculate yields. We worked really hard to make sure that that was the same definition in both facilities, even though you had different people. The facility looks and feels different. At the end of the day, we're still making the same types of bars there, and we tried to standardize not only on the systems, but on the processes and on the KPIs that ultimately really drive the monitoring, the success of these bakeries. So at the same time, we were also having to go through an ROI analysis, so analytics on the data, if you will. We were essentially having to justify why we're spending millions of dollars on new systems in each bakery. And even though we had done it once, we still had to do the same from the co-packer facility, where we were having to implement those same systems yet again. That was a really good exercise. We had complete support at the highest levels within Clif Bar. To make sure that bakery implementations were the top priority and trying to get to that steady state and ultimately getting the types of data we needed out of those facilities. We had the complete support of all of the executive team at Clif Bar and the owners at Clif Bar. Nevertheless, we still had to go through the exercise of justifying why we were spending the investment we were spending in capital improvements on both the individual systems, the expansion of E1 and the addition of additional systems. We also had to do the same in terms of the types of analytics, the additional types of tools that we wanted to include in order to justify those investments. At the end of the day, we came out of that whole exercise with over 3 million bars a day being produced. That's roughly 800 million bars a year now. It actually has gone up since then, and that's a big transformation on two fronts. One, just going into self-manufacturing to begin with, but two, to have all of this new set of data that is now at your fingertips. Information, real-time information about yield, about OEE, information about the quality of our product, the planning exercise and the success of that. How to monitor our sustainability. There's a tremendous amount of waste that comes out of the baking process. Monitoring the sources of those waste, monitoring how we're diverting that waste, all of that is really key to that values-based approach and making sure we're supporting that sustainability effort. I think the other thing to note here is that from the very beginning, there was also a very intentional focus on the experience that our team was going to have in these bakeries, especially the new bakery that we were building from the ground up. So we really took into account the amount of natural light that was coming into the building, because it was really important that our new employees, our new team members, our new employee owners that we were onboarding had the very best experience. And so not everything is something that we can measure in terms of a metric, but where possible, we wanted to really continue to do so in order to support those values that we have as an organization. So at the end of the day, what did we really learn? We learned that it was really difficult in those kind of circumstances to stay true to every one of our aspirations. In fact, you see the red X there on the people side. We really did stretch people to the point that it really wasn't possible to do anymore. And if it had not been for the intentional development of the ingredients that really translated into the owner mentality at every step, then no doubt we would not seen the success that ultimately we've seen and continue to see as we've grown and evolved in our manufacturing journey. It provided that compelling direction. So everybody's approach as we were going into the types of data we were collecting, the types of improvements that we were trying to support, it really was all the same compelling direction. This was a product we believed in, a company we believed in, and something that was worth that extra effort in order to sustain it. It also required the same from our partners, and that's something I can't say enough about. Had it just been the team within Clif Bar and not the same type of support from key partners, that was true on the bakery floor with our MES system. It was true and has continued to be true with partners like Preferred Strategies that have continued to build out the data points, continue to build out the high-performing type of environment we have. Then we would not have seen that success with the ramp-up of the bakeries and the subsequent amount of data that we're trying to make available across the organization to this day. So if the executive support we had from the top, I already mentioned, but it really came from our partners as well. I mentioned the trade-offs. I think the people aspiration is the area where we really saw the biggest impact. We've since rectified that. And at the end of the day, because our co-packer really didn't give us any choice, then it was sort of out of our control. And to see people rise to the occasion on that, I think is one of our finest hours. But also those decisions in the vacuum, that is something we're still seeing to this day. So at the time, we had a limited time frame. We had to make bars or else we wouldn't be able to ship to customers. And so we had to make decisions on the business requirements that essentially are probably not in every case the decisions that would be made if we had a full team assembled, if we had those business requirements really flushed out on the manufacturing floor and with the leadership in each of those facilities. So as we've moved forward, we've continued to leverage that data to try to figure out what improvements can we make. But we've also been working together to try to change that. And that foundation we built with an enterprise data warehouse at each bakery and then collectively as an organization was really key in providing the flexibility to move forward and make better decisions now in things that are really key aspects to what makes that bakery successful, and be able to adapt to those changes, whether that's revising a system, making configuration changes, or even some of the ancillary systems that are integrated to completely replace them. That foundation and that integrated back-end data warehouse really provides that flexibility. Communication was certainly key, and that probably goes without saying in any major project, but for us, it was certainly the case. We also really could have even gone further in really understanding the training needs. I mentioned this before, but it was a steep learning curve, especially for the existing facility, to really try to get up to speed even on the littlest things. And in retrospect, that's something that we could have spent even more time focusing on and trying to really define so that it was more successful from day one. In terms of our next steps, now that we've established the self-manufacturing, built our analytics model around that, if we take a step back now and say, okay, well, what's next for Clif Bar? Now that we've got millions and millions of records that are being produced on the bakery floor on a constant basis, and we're able to tap into that data, what's next for us? And we sort of look at it this way. This is a pretty typical framework that's used in terms of trying to move our organization further up this line. We predominantly are descriptive in nature. That was always the case before. Sometimes it took a lot longer than it does today to assemble that information, whether it was going through a data browser in E1 and copying and pasting that information, turning it into a spreadsheet and then making that descriptive. Or today, where we've got those automated reports that are near real time, but they're still descriptive in nature. We're really trying to describe what happens. And now we're trying to look further down the road and try to figure out next, why did it happen? And we do some of that now, especially on the bakery operation side, where we're really trying to do more advanced analytics to try to diagnose some of the issues that we see, or some of the benefits we see from one line versus another, or one bakery versus another. But then next on the horizon for us will be to move to that next level of predictive and even prescriptive analytics. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. But this is really a very basic but important maturity model that gives us the ability to have this kind of discussion internally. When we talk about analytics, it's really a discussion now about maturity. Where are we on this maturity scale? And I would say, by most accounts, we've gotten really good now at the descriptive nature of this maturity model. Now we're trying to push ourselves further up that line and even experiment with and start to build capabilities around more predictive and prescriptive analytics. So the model that we've begun to roll out as this sort of phase 2 in our analytics journey is what I call a center-led model. It's center-led because IT really does play a critical role in trying to make sure that we're supporting high performance, supporting the kind of data integrity that's essential, supporting the integration of the platform itself, a standardization on tools, which is predominantly Microsoft-centric, and really making sure that we are also continuing to push to the forefront in terms of our capabilities building. So IT will continue to play that role, but we will be the ones that are out there training what we call centers of expertise. So centers of expertise for us are the groups that are really able to take the tools that we have that are no longer requests of IT. So instead of this old method that was very IT-centric, where we would have requests come in for even the slightest changes to the report definition or the visualization. Instead, we're actually training the super users within these centers of expertise to first understand the tool. That's pretty straightforward because the tools that we're leveraging most are very easy to use. Second, to understand the data model. And that's become very easy because the quick launch data models in particular provide a foundation that's very straightforward. It's very easy to learn, and it's very easy to put in place within a rapid period of time. So because we're at a point now where we've not just built a data warehouse model on the back end, but we have the types of tools and the data models to make it very easy to get these teams up to speed, we've begun to push this out. It started with finance. Now we're expanding that to operations, which is primarily the bakeries themselves, with a future plan for other teams well beyond just what you see here. But centers of expertise, where we really give them an initial boot camp, if you will, to train them, get them up to speed on the tools and the data models. And then from there, they're able to take that and push that out to their teams. They're able to make changes along the way to evolve that. That means that IT no longer becomes the critical path. If there's a new need for a KPI, visualization or reports, they know how to do it. They know how to make better decisions on that. And probably most importantly, they now have far more time to do that because they're not waiting on IT. They're not going through more of a manual process where they're collecting information. They're spending more of their time analyzing. So we like to use the analogy of 70-30 to 30-70. In the manufacturing environment, we call this lean. In headquarters, we've begun to adopt that same terminology, where we're really trying to take a lean approach. And that 70-30 to 30-70 for us is anecdotal, but it's a good way to describe what we're seeing time and again as we've begun to introduce this capability across the organization, where analysts used to spend 70% of their time collecting that information and 30% of their time analyzing that information. Now it's the opposite. In fact, it's even better than 30-70. They're spending very little time actually collecting that information and putting it into useful tools, and most of their time making better decisions on that information or providing deeper, more timely analysis of that information. All the while on the IT side, we'll still continue to push to the next level to figure out how do we introduce the maturity and the capability that's needed to support things like more predictive analytics, whether that's through artificial intelligence or using regression analysis on the back end, other types of advanced statistical analysis. That's all IT driven, but driven in the sense that we're trying to teach and develop that capability in these centers of expertise. Okay, I won't spend too much time on this analytics roadmap, but just to give you a little bit of an idea of what that's looked like for us this past several months, 10 months, and through the beginning of next year has been this phase 2 that I mentioned, where we're now taking all this information, beginning to first pilot the centers of expertise with finance and operations. Also critical to this is expanding our master data management. And master data management for us, we sort of took the 80-20 rule, where we tried to get the biggest bang for the buck without becoming overly burdensome on the organization. But that was a big challenge for us just a couple of years ago, where we looked at just a single attribute such as brands, and we said, well, brands is defined differently throughout the organization. If you ask how many Cliff brands do we have, you might get a different answer from different people, and we've tried to change that. But we've tried to change that just with the most important attributes. Rather than solve for master data management across the entire organization, we're really solving for the key attributes and specifically in two key areas. The domain of products and finished good product attributes, and the domain of customer and customer attributes. And those dimensions and measures is actually a relatively short list that really does cover most of the need of standardization across that data. In terms of that approach, I think I've already hit on most of this. The governance process is really key, and in a culture like Cliff Bar, that was important to solve for because it's such a collaborative environment. But also to begin to build in this terminology around continuous improvement, how we are always trying to advance and build capabilities that is better than where we are today. To have that common jargon to talk about analytics maturity, talk about continuous improvement in our analytics capability, and to do so with owners that really do own that domain of data in the centers of expertise, makes it possible for us to continue to build on that and provide better and better capability to the organization. And finally, just on the architecture itself, I won't go into too much detail here. If you have follow-up questions on that, you can certainly reach out to me separately. But by building this foundation where E1, MES, and then a couple of other key data sources all are fed into that common repository, enterprise data warehouse, and applying that master data governance across the organization. So if we take brand attributes, those attributes are propagated through every different silo of data source that we have, whether it's something that's transactional like E1 or point of sale that we get from all of our largest retailers. We apply that same master data governance in the same way. And we also standardized on the visualization. So whether that's using Power BI for our front end for a lot of our dashboarding and KPIs, or other forms of reporting capability, we try to really standardize that so that ultimately we can provide self-service where IT does not become the critical path in the request for new business requirements. The Centers of Expertise is in its beginning stages. We have identified these super users. We've begun to build out guidelines for the Centers of Expertise, and they're just that. They're guidelines that really give a path and direction forward for these Centers of Expertise, and with things like, here's the typical layout, here's the types of visualization that are most effective for these purposes, but gives them also the flexibility to change that as needed. And they continue to teach us in new ways to make that better. And this entire concept of Centers of Expertise means that it is constantly innovating as we feed off the innovation that happens in each one of them. We can pass that through the other Centers of Expertise and continue to refine that capability and learn from each other, even through rotations in those groups with those specific super users. So for us, the foundation, I've mentioned Quick Launch. We do leverage several different modules, so everything from inventory, which is especially key for us now that we're in bakery operations, heavy use on the GL side, in the shipment side, and we're really beginning to build that expertise on the AR and AP side, as well as the sales teams, but also augmenting that with other data sources as well. So you see our MES environment, our HR data, our community data, which is coming from hosted solutions, both on the HR and the community side. All of that is fed into a SQL Server backend, which is our enterprise data warehouse. In some cases, that's converted into tabular models. In some cases, that's not. It really depends on the use case. But the goal in every case is rapid development with the ability to provide self-service to those end users. Okay, and with that, I did want to spend just a couple minutes giving you a live demonstration to show what that looks like for us at Cliff Bar and how we're beginning to leverage that. So this is my personal experience in Power BI, as you can see here, and I've got a dashboard that gives me some of the key information that I care most about. And so this is true for most of our key users right now, where they've got a personalized dashboard that looks very different from one person to the next. And it's the key information that they care most about. So for me, I care about production on the bakery floor because I want to make sure that that is running as expected. So I can see both facilities there and see that trending over time. I can also see a comparison, customer comparison with some comparison of year over year. I care about where we stand on that and how that's happening. I also care about some other non-E1 sources. So you see new tickets, that's coming from our help desk ticketing system, and I can see the new tickets that have come in today to see if incidences or requests is unusual given one day over the next. Monday tends to be the busiest day, and then it sort of trends down during the week with very little on the weekend. But this would stand out. It would also stand out if there were any breaches. That would be indicated with a red. And so I can instantly see at a glance here where we're doing with all the ticket volume. And then also I've put on here for demonstration purposes community service hours. So we can see where we stand with community service hours. And this is pulling from a SaaS-based solution that we use to log community service hours across the organization. And in this case, it's broken down by our 3 major locations. Let me just click on the bars piece here. This dashboard for bakery bar production is something that the bakeries rely on heavily now, and it's giving them an instant snapshot with specific lot information as well. So they can see at a glance here where we stand and what's happening at any point. This is used both by the bakery floors as their supervisors are looking at this information. It's used by the bakery management to see if there are critical issues that are emerging at any time. And then it's also used by our headquarters to monitor different activity that ultimately leads to better decisions in the various areas that they're responsible for. And let me just go back to show one more example, and that is the yield dashboard. So the yield dashboard also pulling from bakery information. I have the ability to take this information and toggle it between bakeries, do both bakeries, look at one brand over another, decide the transactional dates that I want to include. This is something that gives an instant ability to analyze on the bakery floor that didn't used to exist. This is built on the tabular model, the quick launch inventory detail tabular model. So we're pulling this information in. This represents millions of rows of data, as you can imagine, because of the volume of bars that's coming through there, and gives me an instant snapshot to see where we are. I can see where I am with my yield targets for each type of brands. I can even see the scatter plot here, which shows me different types of correlation of data. In this case, we're using that to indicate flavor correlation between the size of the work order and the yield that effectively is achieved. If I then take a specific look at it, so if I look at just carrot cake, for example, I can see that there were 2 work orders during that period of time, and there is a correlation as the volume increases, we're able to achieve a higher yield. Whereas if I take a different flavor, chocolate brownie, for example, it's less of a correlation. The higher volume doesn't necessarily increase the overall yield by that much. This has given them the ability to do a far more efficient job in production scheduling because of the cost efficiencies we can gain if we juggle things around just a little bit. But most importantly, we were taking an hour or more every day at each bakery to pull all of this information that's on the back end and feed it into Excel and then try to get to the numbers that you see on the screen. And now not only is that not necessary, but now you can filter based on whatever range of dates or attributes that you want at will. The second tab gives a little more granular detail of this. So we can actually look at specific work orders. We can toggle by specific lines to see where we're getting the most efficiencies in our yield on lines. If we filter this again down to a flavor level, then we can see which lines are producing better yields than others and take a step back and then start to do a better correlation and a better understanding of why that is. This is something that the bakeries can leverage between the information on each line, but also between information at each bakery and begin to ask the kind of questions, how do we increase our yield and what's driving that yield, which is something that wasn't even possible before. It took so much effort just to figure out what our yield number was. There are a number of other ways that we're leveraging different types of information, everything from shipments. Our employee dashboard is showing the number of employees and where they're located. But given the amount of time we have left, I think I'll stop there and